He is one of the world's leading genocide and Holocaust researchers, Omer Bartov. He teaches history at Brown University and specializes in research on violence, identity and memory. Omer Bartov, who was born in Israel, served in the IDF and later moved to the United States, has become one of the most outspoken critics of the Israeli government. I discuss with him his views on the Israeli military operation in Gaza and how Israel should deal with the Islamist threat. Omer Bartov, good afternoon.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, in one article you said you recognize genocide when you see it, and you see a genocide now in Gaza, right?
Yes, correct.
Why is that?
Well, I actually came to that conclusion long before that article came out. I wrote a previous article in August of 2024 that came out in The Guardian, where I spoke about why I came to that conclusion around May of 2024. So the short of it is the following, that in the aftermath of the Hamas attack of October 7th, there were statements that were made by senior politicians and top generals in Israel that had clearly a genocidal content, in the sense that they talked about flattening Gaza, they talked about there won't be any water or food or power, they spoke about the enemy as human animals, and they said that nobody is uninvolved, so everybody is. And so those were clearly genocidal in content and could also be seen as incitement. But initially, one could have said that they were just said in the heat of the moment by so-called irresponsible politicians because they were so outraged by the massacre of some 800 Israeli civilians. The IDF in Israel stated that the war goals were two. The actual war goals were to destroy Hamas and release the hostages. But by May of 2024, it appeared to me increasingly that what Israel was engaged in was not, in fact, in trying to realize these stated war goals, but rather in actually conforming to those statements, the irresponsible statements that were made right after the attack. That is, that the policy was to make Gaza uninhabitable for its population, to push the population as much as possible to the south of the Gaza Strip, and eventually, by hook or by crook, to push it out. And you could see that because there was systematic destruction of homes, of which now something like 90% have been destroyed, of schools, also 90%, of public buildings, of universities, of mosques, of water plants, of museums. So that the intent was and remains to make it impossible for the population to live there, to go back to their homes, which no longer exist, to harm its health, of course, because as we know now from the report by Physicians for Human Rights Israel, there was a deliberate attempt, quite successful, to destroy the entire medical system of Gaza, so they can have no health services, and to make it impossible for that group at some point, even if the war ends and they do remain there, to reconstitute itself as a group, because all the institutes that have to do with education and with collective memory have also been eradicated. So that was the conclusion I came to already in May, June 2024. And by now, of course, there's much, much more evidence than there was then.
You just said there were 800 victims on the October 7th massacre. I think these
civilians.
Civilians. Oh, right, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. People tend to get this confused. There were also between 300 and 400 soldiers who were killed because Hamas actually took over an entire army base.
Okay, so altogether it was roughly 1,200 people
1,200
Israelis killed in that massacre. I just tried to look at the legal terms that are required to really talk about a genocide. You're also talking about a group, and I was thinking, well, what group is it in a legal, when we talk about legal entities that are mandatory in order to have such a verdict in the end that would say there is a genocide going on. We have a group that is required to be an ethnic group, a national group, or two other, a religious group, and the fourth one is, so we have national,
racial.
Yes,
racial.
Right, yeah. But we're talking about people living in Gaza. What sort of group should that be? There are no Gazans as an ethnic group or as a religious group. So I have a problem putting the people living in Gaza into one of these categories.
So I can help you with that, and it's quite easy. The group is Palestinians. The majority of people who live or lived in Gaza, about 80% of them, either themselves or descendants of Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed from what became the State of Israel in 1948. And many of them actually came from villages and towns that surround what is now the Gaza Strip. Those have changed. So Ashkelon, the city of Ashkelon, for instance, was once a Palestinian city, and there's very little left of that, but there was a city there. And there were many, many villages around. So those people identify themselves as a national group called Palestinians, as an ethnic group as Palestinians, as a religious group because most of them are Muslims. As a racial group, no. Racial group is in general kind of a mushy term. I would not use it anywhere. I wouldn't use it for Israelis either. But these three categories conform to what Palestinians in Gaza are and how they see themselves. And of course, the group has to also have its own self-perception, its own identity. And that's how the people, if you ask them, that's how they would identify themselves. And that's how Israel thinks of them as Palestinians.
You're right, they're Palestinians, they're not Gazans. They're Palestinians also living in the West Bank who are not
Correct.
Attacked in the same way the Israeli military is operating in Gaza.
Correct.
So obviously it's not targeting the group as a whole. And
No.
On the other hand, you're saying it's an ethnic category in the first place, but ethnic Palestinians were also allowed to leave Gaza if they had a foreign passport. So obviously it is not about the ethnicity.
So first of all, the Genocide Convention says that genocide is acts committed with intent to destroy a group, national, ethnic, religious, or racial, in whole or in part, as such. That's the definition. In whole or in part, as such. And what Israel is engaged in right now is trying to destroy that part of the Palestinian population in Palestine, Israel, in the area between the river and the sea, trying to destroy that part of the population that lives in Gaza. It is, however, also engaged in creeping ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, with by now well over 1,000 people killed, with scores of communities that have been eradicated due to settler violence, helped by the IDF. Over 40,000 Palestinians in the northern part of the West Bank have been displaced, and most of their homes have been destroyed. And there's more and more use of tactics that were used in Gaza, creeping also into the West Bank, including aerial bombardments, use of drones, use of tanks, and other heavy equipment, and bulldozers. So, in fact, you can easily see, and this is not only me, this is what many people in the far right in Israel are talking about, and they happen to be in the government, that the next phase after Gaza is the West Bank, because their goal is to have the land without the people in it.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I like what I see. It's just to be precise, because it's a very harsh term to use in such a highly politicized or highly difficult environment or discussions that we're having. So I'm just trying to really look at it. Is it correct that we use these terms? And Also, you just said in the West Bank it's about displacement. You just said that. So that's a different thing, ethnic cleansing or displacement.
Correct.
It's not the same comparing it to exterminate a group as such. You just also made that differentiation.
Right. So let me explain the difference here. That's important. So first of all, ethnic cleansing doesn't appear under international law as such. It's not well defined in international law. It comes under forcible displacement, which is a war crime, a crime against humanity, and under the overriding of a genocidal intent could be also part of genocide. So that's forcible displacement. But historically, if we look at genocides, from the first genocide of the 20th century, of the Herero and Nama peoples by Germany in what is now Namibia, what used to be German Southwest Africa, historically, many genocides begin as ethnic cleansing. Because what is ethnic cleansing? It's the attempt to remove a particular ethnic group from a territory that another ethnic group wants for itself. And once they leave, you don't care where they go. That's how it began in 1904. Only the people who were displaced to a desert where most of them died. That's what happened in the genocide of the Armenians. The goal of the Ottoman authorities was to remove the Armenians from the core of their homeland, and many of them died in these death marches and then in the Syrian desert. And that, in fact, was how the Holocaust began. You have to remember that what the Nazi government wanted originally was to be rid of the Jews. It tried to just force them to immigrate, to leave. And about half of German Jewry actually left. It was only when Germany started expanding and conquered more and more territories in which there were more and more Jews with fewer and fewer places to go to, that it resorted to concentrating them and then to killing them. So there's a very clear link between ethnic cleansing and genocide. And what we see, as I said, even in Gaza, I think the goal, as Israeli politicians see it, as Netanyahu has said himself, he said in May, he said, we are destroying their homes, they will have nothing to come back to. Our only problem is to find countries that will take them in. Even today, there was a report that Israel and the United States are negotiating with South Sudan to take in to Palestinians who would be encouraged to leave the Gaza Strip to go to South Sudan. You can imagine that most people would not choose to go to South Sudan, however much you encourage them, unless you hold a gun to their head. And so, yes, it is both in the West Bank and in Gaza, the goal is ethnic cleansing. The problem is there is no place for people to go. And those people who can leave, who have foreign nationality, well, of course, I mean, who would not want to leave this place because it's been rendered unlivable? People have no water, no food, there's epidemics everywhere, there's no health services, there's nothing. So, of course, if people could, many of them would leave, but they can't.
But again, you're saying, well, the first step is, it's horribly enough, but displacement. It's not to kill them, not to eradicate them as a group, but send them somewhere else. So you're anticipating that would eventually lead to a genocide, which is not happening right now.
No, I'm not anticipating. Unfortunately, I wrote about this for the first time in November 2023. And at the time I said there were war crimes, there were crimes against humanity. Already 10,000 people had died in the first few weeks. And I said it might become genocide at the time. Now we are talking about a minimum of 63,000 people who died. Less conservative estimates put it at more than 100,000 people who died. And you're talking about 140, 150,000 who've been wounded. And you're talking about vast numbers of people who died because there's no medical care, so people with chronic illnesses who could not get support. You're talking about famine there all over the place. You're talking also about something that most people don't talk about, how this is harming births within the group, which is also a subsection in the Genocide Convention, where you see that there's been a rise in I'm losing the word, Well, anyway, 1 out of 5 children born in Gaza, so 20% of the children born in Gaza are born either prematurely or underweight, and they cannot get the proper food and the proper medical care that they need, and therefore the numbers of children who are born and die is very high. Pregnancies, of course, are very difficult because, again, of lack of proper food. And even those children that will survive all of this, and we're talking now about 18,000, 19,000 children who have died already in this war, even those who survive, the kind of effect that this will have had on them psychologically, mentally, and of course physically, will be for the rest of their lives. So you are talking about a complete destruction of the group as such. And what you need to show in genocide is not extermination. Extermination can actually comes under crimes against humanity, and you don't need to show intent for that. What you need to show is that the powers or the organization, the states carrying out genocide is trying to destroy the group as a group, not to kill all its members. So if you kill people, or if you maim them, or if you prevent them from having birth or having health, you're doing that with the goal of destroying them as a group. So even if they live and you put them in South Sudan or Northern Canada or wherever they might go, you have destroyed them as a group, that this was your goal. And in that sense, the numbers are already high. We may be talking about 3.5% of the population already, which is very, very high. But they don't need to be 500,000 or 1 million in order for us to say that this is genocide.
Just coming back to one other point that you made, comparing the situation in Gaza to what happened to Armenians and also to Jews during the Holocaust. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's a slightly different situation since, I mean, Gaza, I've been there in 2008 when the Israelis pulled out and it became a de facto autonomous entity. And Armenians didn't have that, and Jews didn't have that. They didn't have a geographically autonomous part where they lived in. They were just part of a society where they were mingled in and were finally targeted as a group in that society. Here, well, a terrorist organization from that geographical entity attacked another country. So does that make a difference to you, comparing it to Armenians or the Jews in the Holocaust?
So first of all, just to, if you speak about the Armenians, one argument by the Ottoman authorities was that the Armenians were threatening the Ottoman Empire. The Russians had invaded into areas that were heavily populated by Armenians. There was an Armenian underground that wanted to have Armenian autonomy. There were Armenians who were fighting in the Russian army, and so the Ottomans made the same argument. They said this is an enemy from within. The Nazis said exactly the same thing about the Jews, and you have to remember that the whole Nazi ethos was based on the stab in the back of 1918. Who stabbed Germany in the back in 1918? It was the socialists and the Jews, and so the Jews were seen as a danger from within. They were not, but they were seen as such. And that argument was used and was persuasive to many people. So that's just to understand that often, in fact, in most genocides that I can think of, the people carrying out the genocide see themselves as the victims of those they're victimizing. They perceive themselves as acting in self-defense. They do that because otherwise, first of all, those people had done it to them, and if they don't kill them, they would do it to them. The Nazis had exactly that mentality. They were killing large numbers of Soviets and then saying, but it's the Soviets who are guilty of that, and if we don't finish the job, they will do to us what we have just done to them. So this is a kind of mentality and ideology that is often associated with genocide. But in the case of Hamas, Hamas did attack Israel and did kill large numbers of civilians. And I think that although the argument of self-defense is not entirely persuasive, because the Gaza Strip was actually an occupied territory, it was within Israel, nonetheless, Israel could have said, these are war goals, and it did say that. Our war goals are to destroy Hamas and release the hostages. And this was plausible. This was a reasonable argument. But what he went about doing is something completely different. It did not actually try to implement those goals. And there are reasons for that, why it didn't do that. So quite apart from the fact that even if you were subjected to a genocidal attack, it does not give you the right to carry out genocide, because then the UK and Britain and the Soviet Union could have also done a genocide to Germans once they conquered Germany, and they didn't. But quite apart from the fact that genocide is never defensible, in this case, these war goals were not turned out not to be the real goals of the campaign. The real goal of the campaign was something else. It was to finally solve the problem. And there's a reason for that. Because before October 7th, for Netanyahu and Smotrich and people to his far right, Hamas was an asset. And they spoke about Hamas being an asset. They needed Hamas there. And they actually allowed, they actually campaigned with Qatar to provide Hamas with money, which Israelis handed in big bags, in cash. Why? Because as long as Hamas was in Gaza, you could say, well, there's nobody to speak with. These people are fanatics. They want to destroy the state. So Israel wanted Hamas so that you could enclose them behind a fence and say, well, we can only manage the occupation. We can't resolve this issue. This blew up on October 7th because of the Hamas attack. But this government has been unable to state clearly what does he want to do. Let's say he destroyed Hamas. Who is going to take over? And he won't say that because the only group that can take over are Palestinians. That goes back to your question of which people it is. The only group that can take over is the Palestinian Authority or some version of the Palestinian Authority. Nobody is going to help Israel rebuild Gaza, not Saudi Arabia, not Egypt, not the Gulf states, if it's not ruled by Palestinians. And that is the nightmare of the Israeli government, because that actually unifies again the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and opens the way to what I think is the only solution to this, that is some kind of political settlement between Palestinians and Israelis. That's exactly the opposite of the goal of the Israeli government.
Just one point. I mean, you know that we have an ongoing debate about, well, what happened during World War II in Germany, the bombings in Dresden and Hamburg and so on. So there was a massive destruction that happened during that time with a massive death toll and casualties in the civilian population, because the idea was that we bombed the cities and the Germans would finally raise up against the regime, which didn't happen. So it hasn't been classified as genocidal, as genocides, no. But it has been obviously also more than it's not been targeted only on the Nazis, but on the general population during that time. So which raises the question, I mean, how do you, also as an outsider, I mean, I'm not Israeli, I'm not Jewish or anything. I'm just wondering, looking at the situation, no matter what if you're conservative or progressive or whatever, I would say, well, Hamas is the core of the problem. You have to get rid of these people. I mean, they are fanatics, like you said, and they're horrible to their own people. They are not just a threat to Israel, but they are holding their own people hostage. How do you get rid of them? I mean, if you don't bomb them, they have shelters there, they have tunnels there, they sit everywhere in Gaza. I see that as an outsider as a problem, how to find these people, what to do with them. I mean, just talking nicely and gently to them, is that what you'd suggest?
So, first of all, on the bombing of Germany, the Allies, the strategic bombing of Germany, killed about 600,000 German civilians intentionally, partly because they couldn't aim their bombs, and partly because, as you said, it was with the intent that maybe the people would rise up, which obviously they didn't, and they never do. It's not. But why is it not genocide? Well, it's not genocide because, as I said, when the U.S. actually occupied Germany, it provided the Marshall Plan to Germany. It actually helped it revive. And it didn't do it because of altruistic reasons. It did it for political reasons. But there was no serious talk. There was some talk, but eventually there was no serious talk of genocide against Germany. And in fact, Western politicians and even the Soviet Union made a point of saying we're fighting the Nazis, not the German people. It was a very important point. You have to remember many Americans fighting as GIs had German roots as well. And so this was, it could have easily been said to have been a war crime because it was deliberate bombing of civilians. There were others, and historians debate this, whether this was militarily useful or not. So that's putting that aside. Now, regarding Hamas. First of all, Hamas
Sorry, you could also, no, I have to say, well, as an antagonist, I could also say, well, who provides Gaza or has provided Gaza in recent years with electricity, with food? I mean, it's been Israel as well, right? So obviously they did something, well, it's not labeled a Marshall Plan, but they provided them with basic needs.
Yeah, that's an interesting argument. That's like saying that when you're in a jail, then your jailers are providing you with food. They are giving you water. You can take a shower every once in a while, but they keep you in a jail. And so what Gaza became after 2016, 2006-7, sorry, it became, for 16 years, it became a jail. Israel was actually controlling and measuring very carefully the amount of calories that were coming in. And I studied Nazi Germany long before I started dealing with this, and there were the German military was very good in counting how much calories they give to prisoners of war, the minimum possible, right? And that's exactly what Israel was doing. So in fact, when the war in Gaza began in October 2023, much of the population had already suffered from shortages of healthy food because of this control by the Israeli authorities. So yes, they were providing them with food because no, they did not want there to be massive famine, because you see now the political consequences of that, but they were doing it in a way that ensured the population would be weakened and would be enclosed in there. Now on Hamas. Look, Hamas is a radical organization. I met some Hamas people. I don't find them very good conversation partners. And their goal, at least according to their charter, which they try to revise, but one can sort of debate whether they meant it seriously or not, their goal is to create a fundamentalist Islamic state instead of the state of Israel. I'll just say in passing that that's also the goal of the far right in Israel, is to create a halachic state in the same territory. So these groups sort of mirror images of each other. The people, the Smotriches of Israel and the Ben Gvirs of Israel want to create a halachic state, a religious Jewish state, with as few Arabs as possible, and Hamas wants to create an Islamic state with as few Jews as possible. But it's not a conversation partner, for sure. But we have to remember what I said before. Had Israel, after October 7th, had the Israeli government and the military said to Palestinians in Gaza, said, look, Hamas attacked us and we're going to destroy Hamas. And once we destroy Hamas, and you can help us if you want, we are going to enable you to create some kind of decent life for yourselves. We will work with you together and with the international community and with your Arab brothers around the Middle East to create a different Gaza free of Hamas. That was never said. And it wasn't said because it's not the goal. It's not what Israel wants. It does not want a thriving Palestinian community in Gaza. It wants to take over Gaza and return the Jewish settlements there. So it didn't say it. You can also say that, well, and I've heard that said a lot, well, Israel didn't have a choice. They're hiding everywhere in tunnels, and how do you destroy Hamas without destroying a lot of other things in Gaza? So you have to understand that according to even the most conservative military observers in Israel itself, the war in Gaza ended at the latest in May 2024. There is no war in Gaza. All the destruction that is happening now has got nothing to do with the war. There was bombing at the beginning and there was a lot of destruction. By 2024, Hamas as an organized military organization was gone. What you have are scattered guerrilla groups that come out every once in a while and shoot a rocket or a sniper rifle, and sometimes they kill some soldiers. Recently, more Israeli soldiers are dying because of accidents, because they're exhausted and attrition and lack of discipline, but they're not a military enemy anymore. What the IDF has been doing is what one lieutenant, I think, said in an interview a couple of weeks ago. He said, what we are doing is ceiling to floor, meaning we are demolishing buildings, either with army bulldozers or with civilians who are being brought in from Israel, operators of heavy equipment who are being paid by the house, being paid nicely by the house to destroy hundreds of houses in Gaza every week. It's got nothing to do with tunnels, with fighting. It is a concerted attempt to flatten the whole place. And it's largely successful. Well over 70% of the buildings have either been completely destroyed or partially destroyed. And so you could say at fighting Hamas, yes, there had to be some destruction, and obviously there was collateral damage. But you don't reach these numbers, and you don't reach this measure of destruction because you're fighting a war, but because the goal, as I said, is a different goal. The goal is to make the place uninhabitable.
So you say Hamas has de facto ceased to exist already?
Hamas as an organized military doesn't exist. We don't even know who the leadership of Hamas is right now. This has become a kind of strange thing altogether, because it appears that the people who make decisions about Hamas are no longer in Gaza. Most of them were killed, and some of them got out, and then there are people who are outside anyway. There's only one recognized figure who is still in Gaza, apparently in Gaza City, but as an organized military, it's gone. It never was, of course, really a match for the IDF. I mean, they don't have tanks or airplanes or artillery or boats or anything. They have AK-47s and RPGs and rockets. That's all they have. But beyond that, it doesn't exist as a military organization. It exists as an idea, and it exists as those who can still have control over the population in areas that the IDF has not moved into. And when the IDF moves in, they disappear, and when it moves out, it reappears. And if you do away with Hamas, what are you going to be left with in Gaza? Either with gangs, so it'll become a kind of Somaliland, and that's part of some Israelis are saying, well, great, it'll be that. Or it'll be under IDF military rule, the whole of Gaza, including 2 million people, which the IDF is strongly advising against. It was overruled by the prime minister. But if you take over these 2 million people, you have to not only feed them, you have to provide them with medical services, with education, with anything that you do as an occupying power. The IDF is not capable of doing it. It would cost a huge amount of money, and there would be more and more blood spilled, because guerrilla activity can continue ad infinitum. It will never end.
So what would your advice be? It sounds a little bit like you're saying, well, deal with Hamas. They are there.
No. What I'm saying is something totally different. In fact, there was a deal on the table already in May 2024. President Biden presented it. He said that the Israeli government agreed to it, that Hamas agreed to it. And then Netanyahu said, well, actually, we didn't quite agree to that. What was it? It was everything for everything, which is still the same deal as today. That is, you give us all the hostages back, we give you all your prisoners back. Thousands of these prisoners, by the way, are court terrorists, but they're in administrative arrest. They don't even know what they're accused of, because they can't. It's administrative arrest, and it can be, forever. But in any case, return hostages for prisoners. Hamas leadership will move elsewhere, will go to Libya. There was still a leadership then. And then there will be a civilian authority, a Palestinian civilian authority, working together with Arab countries that might bring their own troops to keep some order there, and an effort at reconstruction, so that you move to the political phase. That is what was on the table in May last year. It was again on the table in January. You will remember that incoming President Trump forced Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire. hostages were returned. Large numbers of hostages were returned. Israel was supposed to move to phase 2 of the ceasefire, more return of hostages and negotiations on a final deal. And Israel broke the ceasefire in March, killed hundreds of civilians within a few minutes in air raids, and since then has been operating with the goal of moving the population to the south, concentrating it with an eye to finally getting rid of them. So the offers were on the table. What is the solution? The solution is political. It has to be political. There has to be an offer for Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza to have their own administrative and later political leadership, their own entity, without which you will never solve the problem. If Hamas is destroyed, there'll be Hamas 2 or Hamas 3, because people will always resist being oppressed, humiliated, and living as they have now for most of my life without any rights.
Well, you say it. This is the framework when we're talking about a political solution. But like I said, I've been to Gaza. I speak Arabic. I've lived in the Middle East for 7 years. And I've experienced how deeply rooted anti-Semitism and the hate towards Israel is in Palestinian society. Of course, because of the history, I know where it comes from, but it is there. So you can create, from my point of view, a state and political solutions as long as you want, but the hatred is there. It's there in the streets, it's there in the schools, it's in the mosques, it's everywhere. When I go to a Friday prayer in Cairo, which I did in the Azhar Mosque, it's all about killing Jews and destroying Israel. And if I go to a mosque in Berlin, it is exactly the same. And if I went to a mosque in Gaza or in Bethlehem, I would probably hear exactly the same thing. So how is it possible to twist that or to change that? Or how is it possible? So that there is not only a framework that you set up, but it's also filled with real content and a peaceful prospect.
So first of all, if you wanted to go to a mosque in Gaza now, you'd probably not find one anymore. Because
exactly. Yeah. Okay. But I said Bethlehem.
Yeah. But look, I mean, you're German, so you know your own history. Who would have imagined in 1945 the kind of Europe that you have now? You can easily imagine how much hatred, revenge, despair, rage there was among European populations of Poles against Germans, of French, first of all against the Germans, but also within Germany itself, how much Nazi hatred, racial hatred, penetrated into the deepest recesses of German society. And yet, when the conditions changed, when the circumstances under which people lived changed, when they could see a different future to them, and that future might have been just a washing machine, but some kind of future that would make their lives more secure, that would give their children a better future, that would not be all about fear of others, things changed. It didn't happen from one day to the next. I don't think that Islam, from its very beginning, is focused on Jew hatred. I think that there has been a process. There has been a process both of fundamentalism within Islam and the impact of Israeli policies against Palestinians over a very long time that has indeed created what you describe. And that's, you might say it's understandable, but it's certainly at least lamentable that such an anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli sentiment has been whipped up by fanatics around those that you mentioned. But the way to change that, and we see that in Israel too, that's the sad thing. We see, Jewish supremacy and hatred of Arabs in Israel now growing by leaps and bounds. The extremists feed on each other. you can always point to the other side and say they hate us. They look what they teach their children, and you can say that about Palestinians, and you can say that about Israeli schools. The way to change that is to change the circumstances themselves, and you can only change the circumstances by providing other solutions and finding the people who want that. And I think those people exist. I think they exist within the Israeli population, although they've been shoved to the side, and I think they exist among Palestinians. And I've spoken with many Palestinians over the years, and I know that there are people. Today, of course, it's very hard to speak because of the horrors that are happening in Gaza. But I think the potential is still there. But you have to start by agreeing that you must change the paradigm itself. If the paradigm for Israel is that the only way for that state to exist is to have 7 million Jews boss it over 7 million Palestinians, you can only expect more and more and more hatred, more and more and more violence. And the answer is not, as the Labour Party used to say in the past, okay, we have to separate. Let's put the Jews here and the Arabs here. They live one inside each other's lives. You've been to the region and you know that. There's constant intermixing. In fact, the cultures have become much closer to each other than they either would like to admit. But you have to create some kind of political paradigm that will enable people to envision a different life next to each other, but with equality and with dignity to both groups. And right now, you don't have it. You simply don't have it. And that, as long as this remains, we can only expect more of the same.
I listen and I think, well, I agree. I agree that I wish the world would be like this, that you sit on a table and you, no matter what your differences are, you can talk it over and come to a conclusion. But actually, also since the beginning of the Ukraine war, and I've seen videos released by ISIS, by the Islamic State, the years before, I sometimes wonder, is there evil in the world? And can you talk to evil? And I think Islamist groups, also like Russian aggressors or Russian aggression, is that negotiable? Can you talk to people who don't want to compromise on the fact they want to kill you? Putin obviously doesn't want to negotiate about lives. Correct. And it's not the Palestinians as a whole. Like I said, they are held hostage by this terrorist organization, but they're saying, we want to kill you. How can you discuss things or a future with someone who constantly and with no sign whatsoever to compromise tells you, I want to kill you? I'm just wondering, is there a point where you have to say, okay, we can't agree on anything, it's either you or us?
Yeah. Look, you can follow this logic to its logical conclusion that people who don't want to talk with you, who only want to kill you, you better kill them first. That's a particular logic. And the question is, how many such people are there? Is it all of them? Is it some of them? If you conclude that it's all of them, that there's a whole group, a whole nation of people who are filled with hate and want to kill you, then you may conclude that you need to kill them all. That's genocidal logic. I believe that the situation that we're seeing now and that has been exacerbated over many years is a situation where the extremes on both sides reign supreme. I don't think that they represent the majority of the people. And I agree. I don't think that one can talk with the leadership of Hamas beyond talking with them to leave. And I don't think you can talk, if you've ever encountered the kind of people who are represented by types such as Ben Gvir. These are people you can't talk with. They're fanatics, they're racist, they're violent, and they only understand the language of the gun. But the question is, do you let them take over the entire population, take over your entire life, take over the future? Or can you sideline them? Can you marginalize them? Can you put them back where they belong? Maybe you have to kill them, maybe you have to imprison them, maybe you just have to make them irrelevant. they become irrelevant when people see a different path. Most people are not as fanatic as the leadership of Hamas, including, I'm sure, many of the kids that they're now giving guns to try and shoot. I think many of those kids, just like many Jewish Israeli kids, if you offer them a fellowship at Harvard, would rather do that than go and kill. But they have no such choices. If you give them different choices, if you offer them a different future, not by sitting and talking, Ben Gvir is not going to sit together with some leader of Hamas and reach a conclusion. No, they will kill each other. Not those people. But if you actually try to think yourself out of this sort of grim logic that always gives power to the extremists, and you think about a different future. You know, I worked together with a group called the Land for All, and that was a group that was founded by Palestinians from the West Bank especially, and Israeli Jews. And it is actually engaged in trying to sketch out a different vision for two states in confederation with each other. And it was picking up a fair amount of energy in the couple of years leading to October 7th. Obviously now things are very polarized. There's also a lot of repression in Israel itself. So it's difficult for them to operate, but they're still meeting and talking together. I'm not saying that this would happen tomorrow, but what I am saying is that if you don't have a vision for the future, then you are basically playing into the hands of those genocidal extremists who want to eradicate everything. And once you're in that, then yes, then if they want to carry out genocide against us, we'll do genocide to them. And as you know, Israel is far stronger than the Palestinians. And as a number of people, even Benny Morris said, I think in January, the logic of genocide is here already, and Israel is the much more powerful country. And if it actually decides to, on a total genocide, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, combined ethnic cleansing, genocidal ethnic cleansing, it could do it. That's what we would like to avoid. That's what we want to tell people. You can live side by side with equality and dignity, but you have to rid yourself of the extremists who are now bossing you, who are now actually controlling your lives and sending you to die and to kill.
Omer Bartov, many thanks for this conversation. I hope I was not too critical. I'm really trying to understand. I think it's very complex, and I don't have a fixed personal stance in detail. I just try really to gather information and try to put everything together. And also because we talked so long about the genocide thing, I'm not convinced it's not a genocide. I'm just not, because you have different politicians from the Israeli side saying different things. It's not that they all agree on. So the government, we want to, like I said, we want to destroy the Palestinian group. So I'm just really trying to put together: is it already there, or are we on the way to a genocide? But yeah, we already.
I'll say one last thing for your listeners or your readers. I really strongly recommend that they read the two reports that came out from Israel just over a week ago. One by B'Tselem, which is the most important human rights organization in Israel. These are all Israeli scholars. And the other by Physicians for Human Rights, the Israel branch. And they provide you with an immense amount of information. There's another website, very important, edited by a man called Lee Mordechai, who is a professor at the Hebrew University. I obviously can't give all these figures here, but if you go through these reports, you find yourself truly horrified by the kind of destruction that is being wrought by Israel, and that has to be stopped as soon as possible. So I really encourage people to read these reports, to take some time, not listen to talking heads, but to actually read all these compilation of facts.
Sorry, then I have just one other question, because we talked about it, but I forgot at that point when you were mentioning it. Because you say that Hamas as a group, it doesn't really exist any longer, and there are no clear goals that the Israeli government wants to carry out in Gaza. It's just destroying everything. I mean, there is no capitulation from the Hamas side officially. I didn't find one. So how do we know that they... you said there may be guerrilla groups somewhere. It's because Netanyahu said we want to destroy Hamas, but I don't see, is it destroyed or not? I have no clear evidence. I don't see it.
He both wants to destroy Hamas, and he says he's negotiating with Hamas. So he says if Hamas, sorry, if Hamas handed back the hostages and came out with a white flag, fine, the war will end.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. What do you think would happen then?
Well, we don't know. It's in the future, right? It's conditional.
Yeah, but he's not saying what would happen, right? He's not saying, okay, if Hamas returns the hostages and surrenders or says we lost, then what? What is he saying? Nothing, right? Have you heard him say anything?
So you're saying that it wouldn't stop there?
Of course not. Of course, the
How
only
do you
thing
know?
that's because the only thing that's holding the IDF, as the chief of staff has said, from moving into those areas where there's still population. The population now is in 25% of the strip. 75% is occupied by the IDF, and there's no population there. So they are enclosed in 3 parts of the Gaza Strip, right? If the only thing that's holding the IDF back, apart from attrition and lack of troops and all kind of issues of morale and discipline within the army itself, still a much more powerful force, is the fact that they're hostages. Now, if the hostages return or die, you think that the IDF would just pack up its bags and turn its tanks back and say, okay, now you can have it. No, that's not the policy. That's why Netanyahu will never say that. He will never say, if they surrender, okay, now we are going to help the Palestinians rebuild Gaza. No, that's not his goal. So it's a completely empty statement. It's part of a very savvy Israeli hasbara. If you follow the Israeli media, you know that this is nonsense. There is no Hamas to surrender. The only thing that Hamas is there for is to say we are negotiating with Hamas for a return. But Hamas was willing to return the hostages, bloody-minded as they are, well over a year ago. There was no problem getting the hostages back. You could have had them a year ago, but to stop the war. And Israel said, no, we'll take some of them, but not all of them. He could have had all of them, but he refused to have all the hostages. He wanted only some of them. Because he wanted to continue the war.
That Hamas surrendered as well. I mean, it's not just handing over the hostages, but the goal was also.
What does it mean? What does it mean that Hamas surrenders? What does it even mean? That some guy comes out with a white flag and says, "Okay, I surrendered." It's an organization, all of whose leaders are outside of Gaza, that has no military infrastructure anymore in Gaza either. We know that. So what does it mean? You have to say you are now occupying all of Gaza, apart from where the population is. And even there, of course, the IDF was twice inside the city of Gaza. It just then left because it doesn't have enough people to stay there. So let's say Hamas is gone. What will happen? You have to say that. But the prime minister won't say it, A, because then he will lose his coalition, and then he'll have to, his trial may get a bit faster, and there will be a commission of inquiry about the fiasco of October 7th, of which he is the main culprit, and therefore he doesn't want to have it. And there's an arrest warrant on him. So he needs to stay in government, and he needs to keep his coalition. So he cannot say that Gaza will then be handed over to who? To the Palestinians. God forbid. And secondly, he himself doesn't want it. He thinks now, after October 7th, an opportunity opened up. If you can't manage the occupation as he propagated for years before October 7th, if you can't manage it, then just get rid of them, at least of many of them. And he's talking about it openly. So it isn't that you can say, okay, the war ended, like the war with Germany ended, Germany capitulated, all these field marshals were sitting facing each other, and then peace. And then what? Then what? Israel has no intention of allowing Gaza, not this government, of allowing Gaza to be handed over to Palestinians. Netanyahu said it just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, but it would make it, then, I mean, that would really be the point where everything that we talked about would become evident. I would say, yes, okay, now I see it, it's there, but as long as...
Well, let's wait. Let's wait and see.
Drawing a similarity to Nazi Germany, I mean, Hitler was not in charge of... He lost control. He was just sitting in a bunker, just like Hamas. There were no organized structures any longer. So there were like 5-6 guys sitting in a bunker, and they eventually surrendered.
Look, I don't want to, you know, the last guy who made this analogy was Menachem Begin, who said that Arafat in Beirut is like Hitler in his bunker. I don't want to make this analogy. I'm not making an analogy with Nazi Germany. What I'm saying is that when you defeat a country such as Nazi Germany, there's a point at which you say, okay, I as a country surrender, you as an occupier come in, and as an occupier, your duty is, and that's the British and the French and the Americans and even the Russians did what they could to then help the population, because now you're in charge. Israel is not making that argument. It's refusing to say that. And the IDF is clearly saying, look, if we move into these areas, once we take over 2 million people, we have to feed them. It's us who have to feed them. We don't have the wherewithal for that. We don't have the money, we don't have the soldiers, we have to give them schooling. So that's why we are now in this stalemate, because Netanyahu will not say who will take over Gaza. What he's engaged in right now is in destroying it. That is happening all the time. That's the one thing. There's no fighting. Any IDF person that you speak with, any responsible officer will tell you, they don't know what they're doing there. They have no military tasks, and they haven't had any for well over a year. The only thing they do is destroy and, you know, be afraid that somebody might come out of a tunnel and shoot at them, because it's all one big piece of rubble. But there is no political plan for this. And there's no political plan because Netanyahu cannot square this particular circle. And the only way to resolve it, as far as he sees, is let's get rid of the population. We already have a carte blanche from Trump, who said, you know, you have to move the population out, and then we'll build resorts there. It'll be like the Riviera, right? Now, he forgot about it by then, soon thereafter, Trump. But in Israel, it's cited constantly in the Israeli media, well, we'll move the population out. That's the only way that he can somehow, Netanyahu, remain in power, please his own coalition partners, and accomplish what he's always wanted to do. He wanted to have a greater Israel with as much land as possible and as few Palestinians as possible.
Okay, it's getting longer and longer, but it's very interesting to talk to you. I mean, I hope you have 5 more minutes, because now I also have to ask, I see that, I also introduced you as being very outspoken and critical towards the Israeli government, but looking at it again from outside, I would always say, well, I mean, main responsibility lies at Hamas. I mean, they started this whole thing at October the 7th, and also the suffering of the population. I mean, okay, Israel is doing it, but it has started there, and they keep it going somehow by, again, I mean, I disagree there. I would always say, someone could say, I surrender, we give up. They don't do that. They keep their own people, they keep them hostage, right?
Well, that's also a kind of propaganda line, that they keep their own people hostage.
Is it?
Well, I mean, people living in Gaza now are not hostages of Hamas. They're victims of the IDF. That's what they are. They're being killed in vast numbers every day. Even people coming to get food are being killed in the scores every day. So to say that the hostages of Hamas is a kind of cop-out. But I would say, look, Hamas is responsible for the attack. But you have to understand that the root of the problem, which of course no one in the Israeli government would want to talk about, is not October 7th. What was there before October 7th? So the root of the problem is, as I said before, that after 1967, Israel found itself occupying an equal number of Palestinians as the Israeli population. And it gradually got used to the idea that it can keep those territories. Initially, it spoke about them as being, a card for peace, territory for peace. And gradually, people got used to these territories, and then a messianic movement of settlers grew up in Israel and expanded, and now it's represented very well in the government, which said this is our holy land, and we just have a problem that there are too many Arabs in that land, and we have to find some way of being rid of them. And meanwhile, we have to keep them under our boot. And that was the case in Gaza.
But Gaza was de facto self-governing, right?
Gaza was de facto self-governing and under an Israeli siege. There was no aerial movement, no port, no land movement. Everything was closed. It was living behind a multi-billion fence, which people could leave only under very strict conditions. And that was the case for 16 years, including control of food, water, and energy. Israel could open the tap, close the tap, give them something, not give them something else. It was all under, and the money was coming from Qatar, which was another sort of crazy aspect of it. But it was
Western organizations, billions of dollars
yes,
funding Gaza,
exactly,
which could have been used to build up a prosperous, well, not state, but environment
right,
for schooling and education and so on.
Correct, and they built an airport, and they built a port, and you know what happened to the airport and the port?
It got bombed by Israelis, I know, and then I think the European Union, they rebuilt it.
Correct, yeah, correct. So that's what I mean. And the reason for this is that Israel, since 1967, but certainly in the 2000s, made a decision under Netanyahu, especially following the assassination of Rabin, which was still a kind of potential that maybe there would be some other political alternative. Under Netanyahu, for the last 2 decades, made the decision that the occupation can be managed, that we cannot give the Palestinians any rights. We have to keep them under our boot, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. And for him, the situation in Gaza was, as I said, ideal, because he could easily say, these Hamas people are terrible, you can't talk with them, so what do you want from us? Now, he has an opportunity to say, everybody agrees, Hamas is destroyed, it's out, it's finished, it has no credibility. All the Sunni Arab states have also declared against Hamas. Great. What do you do? What do you do? And he will not say that, because it's clear what has to be done. You have to work with an alternative Palestinian leadership. No Egyptian is going to come in and rule Gaza. No Saudi is going to do it. It's either the IDF, which doesn't want to do it, or a Palestinian leadership. And you can't do it with the Hamullah, with all these tribes there. It won't work. It'll become like Somaliland, and it'll be worse for Israel because there'll be constant violence there. And that he won't say. And that's an indication of what has been a policy long before Netanyahu. He's a particularly bad example of it, but it's an indication of a long policy, Israeli policy. When Israel moved into the Gaza Strip in 1967, there were plans to remove the population. They were ready. In 1956, there were plans to move the population out of Gaza. There is this dream of Israeli Zionism that we want the land only for us. And how do we do it? Only that this time it's being done with particular savagery, riding on the wave in Israel as well as in the world of the massacre of October 7th. And by now, you cannot use October 7th to justify the kind of genocidal policy that is being carried out by Israel.
Omer Bartov, again, many thanks for the conversation. It's become very long.
Yeah.
Sorry for that,
I gotta
and thank
go.
you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you.